Shall we start now?
Yes, Sabina.
Yes, please.
Sure. Thank you. Good afternoon, dear listeners. We would like to extend a very warm welcome from the Indo-German Chamber of Commerce to our webinar today regarding recent developments in the GST regime and their implications. Thank you for joining us this afternoon, and a warm good morning and good day for those joining us from the US and from Germany. My name is Sabina Pandey, and I am the head of the legal department of the Indo-German Chamber of Commerce. One of our main tasks is to assist Indian and German member companies in amicably settling trade disputes, and we have interacted with a number of you present today in this regard. Apart from this, we also bring to you regular webinars and updates on the legal and tax scenario. And today we are very happy and proud to have tied up with the law firm Tri-Legal in order to bring to you the latest relevant information on developments in the GST regime. We will have short comments on this topic by 4 experts, followed by the Q&A session. Please type your questions in the comments sections and we will take them up. And we will also take up some of the questions that have been sent to you, to us already in advance. Thank you so much for that. Now I will quickly introduce to you our speakers of the day. We will begin with Mr. Himanshu Sinha. Mr. Sinha leads the tax practice at Tri-Legal, and he has more than 20 years of experience in advising diverse range of clients on tax issues. His specialization is in the field of direct taxes, both on the advisory and controversy side. His clients are in a broad range of industries, including trading, manufacturing, financial services, education, telecom and media, oil and gas, aerospace and defense, and technology services. Himanshu has advised his clients on Indian tax aspects of international M&A deals, inbound and outbound investments, restructurings, and exits. He has extensive experience in managing complex tax controversies, especially in the field of transfer pricing and international tax. He regularly represents large MNC clients before courts, tribunals, and authorities in high-stake litigation, negotiation, and audits. Many of the cases argued by him have been reported in law reports. Himanshu began his career in the Indian Revenue Service, where he served in various capacities during his 14-year stint with the government. Our next speaker will be Mr. Shashank Shekhar. Shashank has over 17 years of experience in the past, and he has worked with reputed law firms in the tax space. He has extensive courtroom experience while representing clients at various fora, including Supreme Court of India, High Courts, and tribunals, and has obtained favorable judgments and orders for the clients from courts and tribunals. Shashank is currently arguing and handling several crucial high-stakes and industry-wide litigation for various clients. He is actively involved in devising litigation strategies in high-stake matters and also briefs senior advocates as per client's requirement. He has advised clients on several contentious issues and worked in many sectors such as oil and gas, mobile phone, mining, auto ancillary, IT, e-commerce, and so on. And Shashank is an alumni of the Faculty of Law and Delhi University. Then we have Mr. Pranav Bansal. Pranav is a senior associate at Tri-Legal, and he has an experience of over 5 years and regularly advises clients on indirect matters including GST, customs duties, and legacy taxes, such as central and state excise, VAT, and service tax. Pranav is an alumnus of National University of Judicial Sciences in Kolkata and is a member of the Bar Council in Delhi. Last but not least, we have Mr. Tushar Joshi. Tushar Joshi is a senior associate in Trilegal and has over 7 years of experience in indirect tax litigation and advisory. He has handled a wide range of matters related to customs, service tax, SEZ, foreign trade policy, and has represented clients at the education and appellate stage, as well as before tribunals, high courts, and Supreme Court. Tushar has been actively servicing clients in broadcasting sector, mobile phone, power, IT, telecom, infrastructure, and so on. He is an alumnus of the Faculty of Law in the Delhi University. Now, without further ado, I will hand over to our first speaker, Mr. Himanshu Sinha. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sabina, for the introduction. And good afternoon and good morning and welcome to everyone who's joined this webinar, and we are happy to be associated with the German Chamber of Commerce in this respect. In this session, we are going to cover 6 topics. You would observe on the first slide here, we have mentioned that the topic is recent developments in indirect taxes. Earlier, it was communicated that we would cover GST developments, but we have decided to include 2 more developments in the trade space, and that's why the topic has been changed. So without any further ado, I will invite my first speaker, Shashank, who will cover the topic of inverted structure, where he will discuss the implication of a recent Supreme Court judgment which impacts large number of sectors and taxpayers. Shashank.
Thank you, Himanshu. Welcome, everybody. Good afternoon. So I'll just lay the background for this particular topic. So what happens is, in an ideal GST system, input tax credit is entirely set off against output tax liability. However, in certain situations, entire output tax credit cannot be set off against the output tax liability, distorting the fundamental principles of GST. That is value addition, tax on value addition. However, in developed economies like EU and other places, this has been taken care of by granting refund of ITC. But let us see what happens in the Indian situation. Kindly move on to the next slide. Yeah, please. Yeah. So in the Indian situation, refund of ITC is contemplated only when rate of tax on input goods is higher than the rate of output supplies, be it services or goods. And the refund of unutilized ITC on input service is not contemplated in the enactment. Due to this particular policy decision, what has happened is that ITC on account of input services keeps on accumulating, resulting in higher cost of prices or affecting the bottom line. Now, was not the case also earlier. The first year of GST, in credit of input services was also sought to be refunded, but it was retrospectively amended. This particular provision was retrospectively amended to deny credit on input services, refund of credit of input services. So this has basically impacted a lot of sectors such as fertilizers, mining, textile, EPC, trading, etc., footwear also. Kindly turn on to the next slide. Yes. So basically, this was challenged before 2 different high courts, before Gujarat High Court and before Madras High Court. Gujarat High Court held that this denial of refund of input services is basically unconstitutional and against the mandate of Section 54(3), which provided that inputs, court read that input should also be included, including input services, and accordingly it declared Section 89, Rule 89(5) to be read down to include input services within its fold. However, Madras High Court took a different view and upheld the provisions, both Section 54(3) as well as Rule 89(5). Kindly change the slide, come to the next slide. Both these matters were taken up before Supreme Court, which affirmed the decision of the Madras High Court and set aside the judgment of the Gujarat High Court, holding that refund of unutilized ITC on input services is not available under Section 54(3) of the CGST Act, read with 89(5) of the CGST rules. The court held that basically Parliament, in its formulation of policy, takes into account several socio-economic factors, and on the argument of the SSEs that doctrines of principles of equivalence and principles of neutrality needs to be factored in while deciding this particular issue, the court held that no abstract doctrine can be the basis of reading statutory provision, and there is no constitutional guarantee for refund nor entitlement to refund. Therefore, it is merely the Parliament which determines the manner and the extent of the refund. And in its own wisdom, the Parliament has decided that a refund on input services should not be granted on account of inverted duty. So they respected this particular position and did not thought fit to interfere with the policy matter. Kindly come on to the next slide. But however, the court pointed out a lacuna in the formula for computation of refund on account of inputs. The court held that while they will not interfere, they requested the GST Council, which is the body to formulate the policy insofar as GST laws are concerned, to reconsider the formula and work it out in a manner so that both in credit of input services are also utilized before the refund of inputs are computed. So this is a favorable development insofar as Supreme Court urging the GST Council to reconsider the formula. And GST, can you come to the next slide? And GST Council, after this judgment, has set up a group of ministers to examine the issue of correction of inverted duty structure for major sectors, which may include the rate rationalization and other things. Now, where do we stand after this judgment is the question now. So this definitely judgment, though adversely, but certainly brings certainty in the position to be adopted insofar as those sectors which are impacted. Businesses can now pass on the credit which is lying with itself as in terms of prices to be charged from the customers, or in turn they can write it off and claiming income tax benefit to that extent. On the other hand, for the businesses, this also throws up an opportunity to relook at their structure, the classification of the products. If there is an opportunity to restructure the business in a particular state where there are multiple offerings or multiple services and goods are being provided by the business, then they can do so by bringing all the supplies under a particular registration, so that if there is anomaly on account of inverted duty, that can be set off, those excess credit can be set off against other business lines. So all these things can be planned out insofar as the assessees are concerned who are facing this particular dilemma. Kindly come to the next slide. So insofar as trading sector is concerned, what happens is I purchase particular goods at a particular rate and then sell off those particular goods as it is basis to my customers. But in certain situations, what happens is that there is a either change in rate while goods are lying in my stock, or there could be situations when I'm supplying those particular goods or services as it is to an entity or organization which is to whom supplies are partially exempt. In such a situation, board had earlier taken a view that because these are trading items and covered as it is, so therefore there should not be any they should not be granted refund of input services. But recently, Guwahati High Court has decided the issue in favor of the SSCs, holding that in case of traded goods, where there is a rate differential on account of input and output, they should be allowed to avail the benefit of refund. So that's all on inverted duty structure. Over to you, Man.
Yeah, thanks, Nishan. So we can later on take questions. I'm sure some of you may be having some queries. Now, the second topic we want to cover today is the RoDTEP scheme. Some of you may have heard of it. Government of India recently, as part of its trade initiative, has replaced its old trade incentive structure, which was known as MEIS, Merchandise Export India Scheme, Incentive Scheme, by RoDTEP. Now, this was done because WTO had declared our old MEIS system to be in violation of the WTO obligations. So this is important because it opens up new opportunities of claiming benefits which are also compliant with WTO. So I will now invite Tushar to talk about this scheme.
Yes, hi, good afternoon, everybody. So yes, the remission of duties and taxes on exported products scheme is one of the very important schemes that has been introduced by the government recently. Although the government has been quite swift in moving forward with the scheme, the RoDTEP scheme was announced in the budget of 2020, and within a month of its announcement, it got the approvals from the cabinet. Also, in the middle of last year, that was around June and August 2020, the RoDTEP committee was also set up, and also requisition was sent to the industry at large to collect data such that the ceiling rates could be fixed. And within 1 year therefrom, the remission of duty and taxes on exported products scheme has been introduced. Next slide, please. So as was mentioned, the RoDTEP scheme replaces the erstwhile merchandise export from India scheme. Now, the MEIS scheme used to give an additional benefit to the exporters at the rate of 2, 3, and 5% of the exported value of the products. However, the scheme was challenged by the United States. Next slide, please. The scheme was challenged by the United States of America before the WTO, and it was alleged by the US that it violated Article 3.1A and 3.2 of the Agreement on Subsidies and Countervailing Measures. The agreement, the SCM agreement, prohibited the subsidies that were contingent upon the export performances, and the USA was successful in establishing that India had foregone the revenue to benefit the exporters, and resultantly the WTO had ruled against India. So therefore, there was a requirement of a WTO compliant scheme, and that is how the RoDTEP scheme was envisaged. Now, what the RoDTEP scheme aims is to reimburse all those taxes, the embedded taxes and duties, which go into the production of the exported products, which currently are not reimbursable or are not refunded. These include coal cesses, mandi tax, electricity duty, the state VAT and state excise, which is payable on the fuel for transportation, and all of these embedded taxes. Next slide, please. So the scheme has been introduced by amending the foreign trade policy, whereby para 4.01E has been inserted. The rebate under the scheme is going to be granted as a percentage of the export value. However, it will be subject to the realization of the sale proceeds from the exports. Also, the scheme will be given in the rebate will be given in the form of duty credit or e-scrips, which will be freely transferable, and these can be used for payment of basic customs duty only. Apart from that, the RoDTEP committee has also been constituted, and that will look into the determination of the ceiling rates, the revision thereof, also what all sectors are to be covered by the scheme, and priority to be given to the sectors. Next slide, please. Now, as to the manner of generating the e-scrip and claiming the benefit, so one has to make a declaration on the shipping bill, after which it will be processed in the IceGate system of the Customs Department. However, the processing of the shipping bill is going to take place only after the filing of the Export General Manifest by the shipping line or the airline. Accordingly, once it has been processed, a scroll will be generated, which will contain the details of all the shipping bills as well as the duty credit associated with those. And from this electronic duty credit ledger, one can generate the e-script, which will have a validity of 1 year. As mentioned earlier, this can be used for payment of the basic customs duty and will be transferable, freely transferable. Next slide, please. Also, in our experiences, if the declaration has not rightly been made in the shipping bill and there are some procedural lapses, then on account of such technical errors, the courts have held that the substantive right under the scheme cannot be denied, and accordingly, this issue can be taken up before appropriate judicial forum. Also, since the road tax scheme is only restricted to the embedded input taxes, which are currently not refundable, the rates are generally on the lower side as compared to the MEIS scheme. The range varies from 0.5% to 4.3% depending upon the sector to which it is applicable. Also, presently, sectors like iron and steel and pharmaceuticals have been excluded from the scheme. Also, one important feature of the scheme is that this is subject to calibrations and revisions depending upon the budgetary outlays. So if the fund which has been earmarked for the scheme gets exhausted, then there might be revisions in terms of rates or sectors to which it is applicable. Also, if one feels that a particular sector it faces duties, incidence of taxes and duties, which is higher than the rebate which is being granted, into that respect, recommendations or representations can be made to the trade bodies and the road tax committee, which can look into it. Thank you.
Thank you, Tushar. Now we will move on to the next topic, which where we are dealing with intermediary services. Now that's an important topic which concerns large number of foreign companies who, under their business models, have set up support service companies in India, whether it's marketing support or other kinds, in order to provide general support in terms of sale of goods and services. Now, under the GST law, the standard rule to determine the place of supply of a goods or service is the location of the recipient of service. Now, in an export situation, since the recipient is located outside India, ordinarily there is no GST, but the law provides for an exception for intermediaries, and we have seen lots of controversies around this point, that who constitutes an intermediary and under what circumstances this exception will kick in, because there is a tax liability which is often sort of has to be borne as a cost. So I will now invite Shashank to speak about a new development in this space, because there has been a circular which has been issued to clarify some of these controversies, and he will explain to us whether this circular is helpful or not, and to what extent the circular is helpful. Shashank.
Yeah, thank you. As you said, rightly pointed out, that the issue regarding the place of supply is the primary issue in this particular, intermediaries case, and because of which this entire dispute on what constitutes the scope of intermediary and who is an intermediary becomes very important to examine. Now, intermediary has been defined under IGST Act. Can you move the slide, please? Yeah, has been defined under IGST Act to mean a broker, an agent, or any other person by whatever name called, who arranges or facilitates the supply of goods or services or both or securities between two or more persons, but does not include a person who supplies such goods or services or both or securities on his own account. So basically, there are two levels of problems here which we foresee. One is as to who constitutes any other person, because that expands the ambit of the definition multifold. And second is who arranges or facilitates the supply is the second leg of, and how do you construe arranges or facilitates is the second leg of problem. So we shall see as to in what manner the board has clarified the scope and the meaning of intermediary. Let's move on to the next slide. So board says that to constitute an intermediary, there must be minimum of 3 parties and 2 distinct supplies. Now, out of the 3 parties, 2 parties should be transacting in the main supply of goods or services or security, and 1 party, which is the intermediary, should be facilitating the main supply. This will be the intermediary services. So activity in a situation where activity is only between 2 parties, that cannot constitute a scenario of intermediary services. There has to be a minimum of 3 parties. Move on to the next slide. The second clarification comes in the form of who is an intermediary. And intermediary, as we have seen, has been defined to mean a broker or an agent or any other person. Now, any other person could have been very broadly, be interpreted to mean all and sundry. But here, the board's clarification clarifies that the term used means restricts the scope of the definition, and therefore it can be inferred that such any other person should be in the nature of an agent or a broker. So until and unless he acts in the capacity of an agent or a broker, he cannot be construed as an intermediary. And the role of intermediary has to be only supportive. They should not be engaged in providing main supply. If they are engaged in providing main supply, that itself will become the main supply and not that of a supportive role. So if services are rendered by an intermediary on principal to principal basis, services are rendered by a person on principal to principal basis, that cannot be construed as an intermediary service. Kindly come to the next slide. It has also been clarified that services provided by a subcontractor are not intermediary services. But most importantly, what we feel is that the board circular did not clarify as to what constitutes arranges or facilitates, because that is where the entire litigation around intermediary which has taken place. Kindly move on to the next slide. So we have seen litigation as to the following activities when performed by a entity such as business promotion and marketing services, IT enabled services. All these have been subject matter of litigation where department says that a case of pure and simple business promotion or marketing services which are undertaken on behalf of a foreign principal, that will constitute as an intermediary, or somehow some sale would have taken place on account of the activity of the Indian company. Similarly, what happens also is that now, because the term security has been added in the scope of intermediary definition of intermediary, so any private equity firms in India gathering research and providing such services to their foreign counterpart may also come within the net of intermediary. So these are ideally board should have clarified as to the nature of facilitation or arrangement. Kindly come to the next one. Next slide, please. So according to us, ideally the board should have clarified as to what is the scope of arrangement and facilitation and how it can actually be subject matter of taxation or not. So the questions which arises and we feel these questions are: is it limited to identifying arrangement and facilitation is limited to identifying and scouting for customers for the principal or facilitation of a particular specific transaction, or can it be construed so widely to include marketing and support services? Is successful conversion of customer for the principal a criteria? Does the nature of consideration paid by the principal a determining factor? So all these are questions which needs to be answered. There is no clarity as of now insofar as these questions and many other are concerned. Kindly come to the next slide. So as Himanshu stated in his address at the beginning, that the primary problem on account of intermediary arises on the place of supply of the intermediary, which is the the place where intermediary is located. For Indian intermediaries, India would be the place of supply, and because if India is the place of supply, it cannot qualify as export of services. Now, what happens in a situation where the export doesn't take place? In such a situation, intermediary will be required not only to forego the benefit of refund on input side, but also be required to discharge IGST or GST, as the case may be, on its transactions. Whatever fees is, or commission is earned by the intermediary, it will have to deposit GST at the rate of 18% on such earnings. So this is the problem, and this was challenged before various high courts in the country. Kindly go to the next slide. So this was challenged before Gujarat High Court, but Gujarat High Court refuted the challenge, and this matter is pending in review. The court's view was that section 13(8)(b), which as per which the place of provision of the intermediary has been laid down, is correct, is not unconstitutional, is a valid provision. Whereas Bombay High Court rendered a split verdict insofar as this particular provision is concerned. One judge said that this is unconstitutional, the other one said that this is valid provision. On the scope of intermediary, there's a batch of petitions before Punjab and Haryana High Court pending and to be decided. Kindly move on to the next one. Skip the slide. Next one. So even insofar as the intermediary services are concerned, there is no clarity as to whether IGST will be payable on the services by intermediary, or whether CGST plus SGST will be paid. Gujarat AR Authority of Advanced Ruling takes a view that it is IGST which will be leviable. It will be CGST plus SGST which will be leviable on rendition of intermediary services to a foreign party, whereas Maharashtra takes a view that it is an interstate supply and therefore IGST should be paid. So there is a lot of confusion still on the issue of intermediary, and a greater clarification is still required from the board. Thank you.
There was one more pre-deposit. Do you want to cover?
Yeah. So there is another issue which has, what was happening is that in cases of litigations and appeals, SSEs were, depositing their pre-deposit by utilizing their credit in electronic credit ledger. Now, this came to be challenged before Odisha High Court, where the Honorable Court held that this is impermissible. Electronic credit ledger cannot be utilized to make pre-deposit. The court took a view that, as per reading of section 41 and section 49, it is impermissible to utilize the electronic credit ledger in situations other than cases of self-assessment payment of tax. So this adversely impacts the SSEs who were relying on ECL to make their deposits of pre-deposit. That's all from my side.
Thank you, Shashank. I will now once again request Tushar to talk about a recent circular that has been issued by CBIC on establishment of distinct persons. This is also in the context of exports. So this impacts offices and branch offices, representative offices and subsidiaries set up by foreign companies, and what would qualify as exports. So Tushar, can you please explain the significance of this recent circular?
Yes, thank you. Can you move on to the next slide, please? Yes, so under the GST, to qualify as export of services, one of the conditions that has been specified is that the supplier and the recipients should not be merely establishments of distinct persons. Now, as to what are establishment of distinct persons? Next slide, please. This has been provided in the two explanations to section 8 of the IGST. A conjoint reading of these two explanations will lead to the conclusion that in case there is an Indian company and there is a branch office of this Indian company outside India, or in case of a branch office of a foreign company in India and that foreign company, these would constitute as establishment of distinct persons. Now the question that arises is, what happens when services are rendered by the Indian company to its branch outside India, or by the branch office of a foreign company in India to the foreign company outside India? So on this issue, the board has issued the clarification. Can you move on to the next slide, please? Yes, so one clarification was issued in the 45th GST Council meeting, and thereafter, following that, was a circular that was issued on this issue. So essentially, the clarification that has been issued is that if out of the two entities, both of them have been incorporated, one of which is in India, incorporated in, under the Indian laws, and the other entity has also been incorporated under the foreign laws, then these would constitute as separate persons. And therefore, these are not going to be mere establishment of distinct persons. So what are the implications of this? Can you move on to the next slide, please? So what happens is, if a service has been rendered by the Indian company which has already been incorporated in India, which is incorporated under the foreign laws, then these are treated as separate persons, and the service rendered by the Indian entity to its branch will qualify for an will qualify as export of service. However, in contrast to this, if the service has been rendered to a branch which is not incorporated under the foreign laws, then these would still be establishment of distinct persons only, and this would not constitute as export of service. Next slide, please. Similarly, if the branch office of a foreign company in India is incorporated and provides the services to the foreign company, then these again would be treated as separate persons, and the service would qualify as export. However, where the branch itself in India is not incorporated, the rendition of service by such branch to the foreign company will not qualify for export of service. Now, why this becomes important is under the GST laws, the export of services are treated as zero-rated supplies, and there are certain benefits associated with zero-rated supplies. For example, one can avail the refund of unutilized input tax credit. So that is where this becomes important, whether the transaction qualifies for export of service or not. Next slide, please. So in a situation where the Indian company renders service to the branch which is unincorporated and is outside India, this doesn't qualify for export. Similarly, in case of a foreign, the branch office of a foreign company supplying services to the foreign company, this would not again qualify for export of service. However, not only will it not qualify as an export of services, but also this is going to be treated as an interstate trade under section 7(5)(a) of the IGST Act. However, thankfully, there is an exemption which has been granted, to this leg of transaction. Only one point over here, that although there has been an exemption, but this may trigger reversal of the common input tax credit pool. So one has to be cognizant of that fact. Next slide, please. So there have been certain recent rulings by the Authority of Advanced Ruling as well as the Appellate Authority of Advanced Ruling with respect to the liaison office of a foreign company in India. So the scope of a liaison office is quite limited. The liaison office actually has to get registered under the FEMA in India, and also has to obtain permissions from the RBI. Now the scope of a liaison office is very limited. They generally restrict themselves to taking care of the licensing work with the Indian suppliers, which may be related with quality checks, procurements, etc. And they do not get into any trading or commercial transactions apart from providing this support. So also most of their expenses are reimbursed on cost-to-cost basis by the head office and apart from that, there is no other independent source of income. So keeping all of this in mind, the recent rulings have held that the LO cannot be treated distinctly from the HO, and this is actually the liaison office is actually an extension of the head office only. And in this sort of a scenario, it is actually a service to self, and technically it doesn't qualify as a service under GST, and that is why no requirement of registration is there under the GST, and the GST is not going to be payable. So that is what has been held qua the liaison office and head office relationship. So that's it. Thank you.
So moving on, we will now cover the draft policy for data centers. Government has come out with a new policy in order to promote setting up of data centers, and the concept of special economic zone, etc., have been now being discussed. So I will now invite Pranav to talk about this initiative of the government as it may impact the digital sector and many companies going forward.
Thank you, Himanshu. As informed in this part of the presentation, we will cover the recent draft data center policy that has been released by Ministry of Electronic and Information Technology. So, in the recent times, we have witnessed a lot of movement in the field of data center. Various companies have approached us to advise on benefits available, as well as the process of establishing the data centers in India. So the main reason behind this is tremendous growth in the usage of smartphones, social networking sites, etc. Plus, very recently, the government has introduced data localization policy as well. So basically, the idea is that the data of the Indian resident should be stored within the jurisdiction of India. So these have been already implemented for the telecom and the banking sector. Currently, the government is in the process of notifying a data protection law, which would bring the first in the economy-wide data localization framework in India. So now this has catapulted various industries which store data of the Indian residents to establish the data centers. Now this could be a telecom sector, this could be an automobile sector, any sector which is collecting the data of the Indian resident, they are establishing data centers in India now. To cater to this requirement, the government has issued this draft data center policy. Now, this draft data center policy will be used by the states to frame their own policy, because the benefits eventually come from the states. So now, until now, there was no specific policy to encourage establishment of data centers in India. These were broadly included in the IT-ITS policy, which was notified by each of the states in India. So now, under the IT-ITS policy, there was no special benefit to the data center. However, on a very broad level, you could claim that you are covered under the IT, covered under the ITS, and therefore they could claim the the broad benefits which are available to the IT units. Now, due to recent developments, the government has come up with this policy, as I mentioned, draft data center policy. So the this policy basically just lays down the broad guidelines. The implementation as well as the particular benefits which will be available will be cleared out during the course of time. Now, by utilizing these central level draft data center policy, the state of Haryana and Maharashtra have already come up with a draft, and it is expected that both these states will implement their draft data center policy in the next few months. So now, once these policies are issued, then we will know the exact benefits which will be available state-wise. But on a broad level, the proposed benefits which have been suggested in the draft data center policy by the center can be divided into 5 heads. The first one deals with creating a favorable environment in India. Now, this favorable environment, it can be divided under 5 subheads. The first one is to focus on developing the infrastructure. Now, to do this, the central government intends to declare data centers, to give data center infrastructure status. Now, what that does is, the data centers, when they're establishing their units, they can raise money from the insurance company, pension funds, and international lenders for a long duration on easier terms compared to what are there for the general units. And similarly, they can also access the foreign currency funding through external commercial borrowing. So once these are declared as infrastructure projects, then generally the lending will be available at a very favorable terms. The second subhead is to ensure that all these data centers get easy clearance when they are establishing the units in India. So now to do this, the government intends to publish a list of all the clearance which would be needed. So they will be available in a single document. They will also define timelines for each of the approval. Further, there will be a single window clearance which will be established. Now, the purpose of the single window clearance is because when you're establishing, you might have to take permissions from various departments. So now the single clearance allows you to approach a single department which will, on your behalf, ensure that all clearance could be obtained through that channel. The third subhead is to establish data center parks. Now, this is from the perspective that special parks will be created for data centers, and in these parks, the land will be provided easily. It will be ensured that the power, which is the most important factor for establishing a data center, this would be available 24/7. Then a high capacity network will be established so that internet is available to these data centers. And this will be done in a park where these special units can come up. Now, there could be other fiscal and non-fiscal benefits also. It is expected that the states, when they notify their own policies, they will lay down the criteria as well as the particular benefits which will be available. But the incentives are also expected to be given to the companies which will manufacture the IT and non-IT hardware for these data centers. The third broad head is to create a favorable ecosystem. In this, the government will ensure that all the data centers are provided uninterrupted power supply. They can also set up their own power generating units, and again, the internet will be made available to them 24/7. Then there will be data center economic zone which will be established. The government intends to establish 4 of these data center economic zone. The benefits will be similar to what are provided to the special economic zone. So basically, this means that when you're importing goods or services in India, you might not have to pay the customs duty upfront. Now, the next one is to build the capacity. Now, to do this, there will be fiscal benefits. Then there will be benefits given to the industries which are established, which manufacture IT and non-IT components for data centers, both in India as well as outside India. Then the Ministry of Skill Development and Entrepreneurship will impart training in the Indian environment so that the workforce is available to the data centers at faster rate. Now, there will be institutional mechanism. Basically, there will be a facilitation center set up, which will regulate day-to-day implementation and also will address the problems which are faced by the data centers on a day-to-day basis. Now, these are, again, as I mentioned, these are general framework of the policy. It will be important to look into these specific benefits which are given by the state. And once it is decided that a data center has to be established, the benefits of the states will have to be compared to reach a conclusion which state is offering the best benefits for the data center. That would be it from my side. I will hand over the mic to Himanshu.
Yeah, so thanks, Pranav. So that's something to watch out for. It's an important development that will pan out in the coming months. So the last slide, I will ask Pranav to cover some of the changing tax rates and an issue pertaining to change in law, which often crops up in many contractual situations. So Pranav, can you just quickly go through this slide and then we will invite questions.
Thank you again, Himanshu. So very recently, we have seen that the GST rates were changed. This was implemented from 1st October 2021. We are not going into detail, but we'll just refer to major rate changes which has happened. The first major rate change was to the renewable energy devices and parts. So the GST rate has been increased from 5 to 12%. Next is ores and concentrates such as iron, copper, aluminium. For this, the rate has been increased from 5 to 18%. Then railway parts, in this, the GST rate has been increased from 12 to 18%. And the packaging material, again, the rate has been increased from 12 to 18%. Now, besides this, also we have seen frequent rate changes by the government in respect of goods as well as services. Now, this rate change has a significant impact on the long-term contract, especially tender, where the price is fixed at the outset. If there's an increase in rate, it leads to a dispute on whether vendor or the customer will bear the GST portion. Therefore, it is very important to have a very robust change in law clause in the agreement when it is entered into. Many times we have observed that a general clause is inserted, which is not wide enough to cover various spectrums of rate change. For example, in a recent dispute that we were handling, we noticed that the change in rate only addressed the output change in rate and not the change in rate on the input side. So this basically led to a situation where change in rate on input impacted the costing of the company, and the customer argued that the change in rate clause only covered the output change in rate of GST. Therefore, it is very important to keep these clauses very broad. So generally, so when this clause is drafted, it is important to take into account three most important factors. So one is to cover the enactment, amendment, repeal of law, etc. in India. Second is to cover change in interpretation or application of law. Now, this is very important because law, as we all know, is subject to various interpretations. So industry could have taken one interpretation, some government could have taken another. So once the dispute is settled, then the things become clear. So it's important to have this clause so that once the dispute is settled, then also this clause can be invoked. Next is, of course, to cover any change in tax, duties, or cess of or application of new taxes. So these are broadly what has to be covered in the change in law contracts. Of course, these are very general guidelines. The contract has to be seen in the context to appropriately draft the change in law language. But again, so these are very essential factors which should be taken into consideration. So again, this is that's it from my side. I'll hand over mic to Himanshu. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Pranav. So we are just in time for some Q&A. We have 10 minutes, even though officially we are supposed to end at 4, but we will take questions for 10 more minutes so that at least we are able to answer a few of the important ones. So I will now invite Sabina to raise some of the important questions that the audience have sent.
Yes, first of all, thanks to all 4 of you for the wonderful deliberations.
You're on mute, Sabina, you're on mute.
Sorry, I've unmuted. Can you hear me now?
Yes, now we can hear you.
All right, okay. Yeah, thanks a ton to all 4 of you for the wonderful deliberations on so many aspects besides GST. And yes, let's go immediately into the questions. We have received some questions in advance from the audience. So one question was, GST on renewable energy devices has been increased to 12% from 5%. What will be the IGST rate?
Right, so I will take up that question. So basically, for changing the rate of renewable energy devices from 5 to 18%, similar notifications have been issued under CGST as well as IGST Act. So the notification number is 8 of 2021, IGST, dated 30th September 2021. So for IGST also, the rate is 12% for renewable energy devices.
All right, very clear and simple answer. Thank you for that. Our next question is, Indian company is getting commission on order execution from the outside India parent company, and the customer is also outside India. What is the GST applicable?
I don't think there will be any change in the situation. I think that GST will be required to be discharged by the Indian company, which if acts as an intermediary, it will have to pay GST.
Okay, all right, thank you. The next question
just to add
is,
here that
The
the
new
new circular that has been issued, which
was explained by Shashank, that clarifies one very important point, that if the contract is on a principal to principal basis, then the intermediary situation will not arise. So I think that is a very important takeaway from this circular. Only in agency situation or brokerage situation, you will have an intermediary problem arising. So if you take care of that you're not acting on behalf of the principal and you're not binding the principal, etc., if you don't have the authority to act and legally bind, then you can claim that you are not an intermediary, you are providing services on a principal basis.
All right. Thank you so much. The next question is request clarification regarding Indian agent who in an intermediary between a factory in Germany and customers in India. I hope the question is clear.
Yeah, the question is clear, and they have assumed that it's an intermediary, and being an intermediary, I understand that GST will be payable on the transaction.
Yeah, so if basically if there is an agency relationship and the facilitation or arrangement of sale of goods is being done by the agent, then you would qualify as an intermediary. The only way to escape out of it is to have a principal-to-principal relationship, and that is the way one can get out of this. Because there are many companies who provide sales support. Now, sales support is different from acting as an agent. Agency relationship arises out of a legal relationship born out of a contract, where one party has authority to bind the other one. Whereas a sales support is merely a support which is provided, which is not specific but general in nature. And the person who is providing the service does not have the authority to bind the other party.
Thank you very much. The next question is referring Supreme Court decision, should we repay refund received on inverted duty tax from the department now or wait for revision? Sorry, should we repay the refund received on inverted duty tax from the department now or should we wait for revision in the formula?
We should pay the refund. Repay the refund since interest clock would be ticking. So the interest clock would start running from the day refund would have been granted to us. And now, because the issue has finally attained finality due to the judgment, I don't think the Supreme Court will relook its decision any soon. So, and government, if it revises the formula, to what extent the formula is made retrospective, that also needs to be seen. So it is better to repay the refunded amount and take back the credit.
Oh, thank you so much. Now,
Sabina,
do we have time for some more or yes, please?
Yes, Sabina, we can take a few questions on RoadTap scheme. Tushar can take one of those questions which have come up on RoadTap scheme.
Sure. There was a question on with regard to iron and steel. Iron and steel is excluded from RoadTap. Does it include only processors of iron and steel? This exclusion or what? I think you're on mute, Tushar. Can't hear you.
Yeah, he's trying to unmute. He's trying to unmute.
Okay, sure.
Yeah, so just broadly answer these questions because a few of them actually are related to what all sectors are included and what all products are included. So Appendix 4R has been notified by notification number 19 of 15 to 20 on 17/8/2021. So one may refer to that just so that in case there are some doubts as to what all goods are being covered in what all sectors. Also broadly, this scheme pertains to products. So the ancillary services associated with which go into the manufacturing might not be getting the benefit. Services probably will not be getting covered. Also, there was one question with respect to whether in cases of reversal of ITC, can one go for the RoadTap policy? Now, basically, representations for all the embedded taxes and all these such costs can be made to the RoDTEP committee which has been set up and which has been set up precisely for this reason, to look into the costing of the taxes, what all taxes are actually becoming costs to the production of exported products, and accordingly they can be deliberated and the committee can come out with revisions in the rates.
Thank you. Sana, Monas, do we still have time for a question more or one last question?
Yes,
Himanshu,
please,
would you
Sabina.
like to? Yeah.
Yes.
Would you like
So,
to click on one more? Then we'll wind up.
Yes, so there was a question on why to pay GST against development cost like tooling fixture against export invoice. So, Shashank or Tushar or Pranav, do you want to comment on that? That GST on development cost of tooling against export. I assume this is a question pertaining to input tax credit because effectively there's an import on tooling which goes towards the goods which are manufactured and exported. So ideally it should be available as a refund.
Yes,
It should be available.
whatever is exported input side,
You could,
yeah, it should be available as refund. Whatever goes into, if we are exporting those tools and whatever inputs which are gone into manufacture of the tools should be allowed as refund. Because this would qualify as a zero variance supply.
we have many other questions which we have received. Unfortunately, we have run out of time. So what we will do is that we will individually reply those questions and send it to Sabina and her team, and she can then forward to you to the respective members who had raised those questions, because we don't know the identity of those people who sent those questions. There are several of them, more than a dozen. So we will send short replies to Sabina, or if she can send us the email, then we can directly reach out to those members who have raised those questions.
Yes, we will do that. And may I request Sana or Hani, please to show the slide once again with the email address of Trilegal so that those who still have questions, they can also write directly to you.
Sure.
That will be helpful. And yes, coming to my small vote of thanks. Thank you for patient listening. Thank you to the audience for your patient listening this afternoon. I'm sure this was very valuable. There were lots of new things discussed, which are very relevant to our members, especially from the exporter community and from those who have branch offices or liaison offices over here, those German companies. And thank you to all four of you for the wonderful talk. I really liked the format. It was very nice and interesting to listen to all of you. And have a good afternoon and happy Diwali to all. Thank you.
Thank you everyone, and happy Diwali to everyone. And I hope you enjoyed. And if you have any questions, please feel free to send it to us directly, and we will send you a reply. Thank you very much, and happy Diwali.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye, Sana. Bye, Monas.
Bye. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.